my name is Hugh Martineau. We're standing in the field here at Trebervith Farm by Langos Lake. The farm here is 250 acres. We took on the farm about 5 years ago now, and we're slowly establishing the farm enterprise. We've got some Romney sheep now, and we're looking to expand it into some cattle in the near future. We're looking to try and do something which integrates appropriate environmental management with productive farming.
Could you give us a brief overview of the project and where the initial idea came from?
The project here is looking at carbon neutral farming, or how to get to a net zero position within agricultural production systems, and I'm working closely with 6 other farmers in the area. So we've got a farm over the other side of the lake and the other side of the ridge, and then there's a couple more around the area that we're working closely with. We collectively discussed the challenges around greenhouse gas emissions and the sort of net zero goals that are being set within the industry and by our customers as farmers as well. So we wanted to know the feasibility of getting to a carbon neutral or a net zero position.
And can you tell us what work has been undertaken so far on the project?
Yeah, so the project's been split into 3 work packages, if you like. So the first of those was actually doing the greenhouse gas emissions assessment. So we've looked at all of the enterprises within the project group, and we have been looking at the greenhouse gas emissions from each of those systems. So the enteric fermentation emissions from livestock, the nitrous oxide emissions from the use of nitrogen on the farms, and then other things like energy use as well. So Bangor University have been leading that element of the work and have produced the results so far from so effectively giving us a baseline position on our emissions. The other component of work which is now completed was the soil sampling and analysis for carbon stocks. So across each of the 6 farms there's been quite an intensive amount of soil sampling activity, and we've now got a soil carbon stock baseline from which we can understand what the potential for future sequestration into soils looks like. The third element of the work, which we're going to be talking a bit about today, is looking at hedgerows and the role of woody biomass on the farm. So we're going to do assessment of trees and hedges in terms of the carbon stock that they have and hold on the farms, but also we're hoping to fill a bit of a gap in the understanding of hedges in terms of actually understanding the carbon stock changes and sequestration capability of the hedges. So we've got Eric here from Forest Research today, and what he's doing is using LiDAR technology to effectively assess the biomass density of the hedges at different ages. So what I've done over the course of the last 3 or 4 years is left hedges to grow and cut certain bits of them, so I can understand from the assessment that Eric's going to do is how much biomass is accumulated from one year to the next based on different cutting regimes, which will hopefully help us understand how to manage his hedges in the future for not only biodiversity but also enhancing the sequestration.
And there's a lot of interest currently on carbon storage within the soil, isn't there? Was the results over the 6 farms what you were expecting it to be? Or did it differ a lot between farms or even between fields?
Well, a lot of us are on a similar type of soil series, so we're on sort of red sandstone bedrock and quite high sand components. So actually the carbon storage capability is slightly limited by that in some ways. So in clay soils you can actually store significantly more carbon than you can in sandier soils. But we were still hitting a sort of 5–6% organic matter on our permanent grassland, so we're really pleased with that. And that's replicated across the group.
You mentioned that Bangor University are part of the project, and they were doing the carbon calculations across the farms. What sort of parameters were they looking into?
Yeah, so Bangor have been great. It's been really good working with them. So they collected a lot of data about each of the farms within the project group. So effectively what they were looking at is the production system on the farms. So they were looking at numbers of livestock, looking at fertiliser used and purchased, what's been brought onto the farm, because the embedded emissions associated with those elements are also included within the greenhouse gas emissions assessment. And then they're looking at the output, so how much has been generated by each of the farms, because when we're looking at the emissions intensity calculations, we're effectively dividing the emissions occurring on the farm by the output. So efficiency is a really important component of greenhouse gas emissions reductions.
And then from looking at your own farm, where do you see the biggest potential of either increasing your carbon storage or reducing your greenhouse emissions?
Well, we're in a slightly interesting position because we're scaling up the operation at the moment in terms of increasing livestock numbers. So our emissions look pretty awful actually in the first few years as we're building up the stock numbers, because actually our production is low. When we get to a sort of steady state of production, then at that stage we will be looking for every efficiency we can find. So it's really all about how we use the resources on farm as efficiently as possible to generate as much output as possible. So we'll be looking at how do we use legumes, how do we generate as much from within the system as we can using the resources at our disposal. So try and reduce any feed purchases onto the farm, try and make best use of any muck that's being used, and then also thinking about the use of legumes and herbal rich lays and things like that will make a big difference. Not just in terms of the emissions from the use of inputs, but also actually in terms of the sequestration, sort of maintaining permanent grass, making sure that we're looking after the carbon stock that's there, and wherever possible enhancing carbon stocks within soils as well.
And there's a lot of interest currently within farming about the financial opportunities with carbon credits. What effect could this have on the target to reach net zero?
It's a really topical area, and it's actually, from a farmer's perspective, a little bit difficult to know what to do about the opportunity from carbon credits, because people are offering sums of money to purchase the carbon credits that are generated within the farm system. My particular view is that we need to make sure that we as farms, our individual enterprises, are as close to net zero and moving into sort of a net positive area before we really trade our carbon out with the system. Because otherwise we're potentially giving our carbon credit away to other industries when we really need to keep it within agriculture. It's a big enough challenge on its own, making agriculture net zero without trading our carbon out with that.
And it seems the market at the minute is for kind of new additions to carbon storage, so planting new trees or new hedgerows. Could work such as what Eric is doing, measuring the carbon storage within existing hedgerows, could that be used to add to that market? So it's also looking at existing infrastructure, existing green infrastructure on the farm?
The work that Eric's doing here will enhance our understanding of what hedgerows are providing us in terms of sequestration potential. That's really important because at the moment our calculations, a lot of them just assume that hedgerows are in an equilibrium position. They're effectively emitting as much greenhouse gas or carbon through the annual cutting as they are sequestering. I like to think of it in the terms of what's the fate of the carbon that has been removed. If we're effectively cutting it and letting it respire back into the atmosphere, then we're losing everything that we gain within that cycle of production. So if we can figure out ways of actually retaining the carbon as much as possible, then that's going to be beneficial. And that's why we are looking at ways of removing woody biomass in a sustainable way, and then through hedge laying, which is an active management of the hedge. And then we are looking to hold on to the carbon which has been harvested. So we've chipped a lot of the wood, we're using it as livestock bedding, and then we will return it back to the soil. Rather than, in some instances, it might get burnt, which is effectively just releasing all of the carbon which has been sequestered back into the atmosphere, and there's no net gain in that situation.
And there's another year left on the project here. What are the next steps?
So the next steps are specifically on the hedge work that we're doing today. There'll be another measurement that's taken in a year's time, or maybe just under a year's time, which will pick up another sort of year's worth of growth within the hedge, and that will be measured. And then ultimately what we're looking for is to bring together the different components of the project. So the measurement of the carbon stocks within hedges, the measurement of carbon stocks within soils, the potential stock changes which will give us that overall sequestration capability, and then that will be used alongside the greenhouse gas emissions assessment that Bangor have done. So it will effectively allow us to understand our net zero position and allow us to understand what we can then do in order to push towards a net zero goal.